Hi, everyone. Good evening, and welcome back to Sword of the Spirit, Sermonator, episode 112. And I will tell you, I got a barn burner tonight. I don't know if I can finish it tonight. Some years ago, when they still had newspapers on Sunday and we still had the comics, there was a comic strip called Nebuchadnezzar. And it was goofy, and it really didn't have much at all to do with the name, the origin of the name, but it gave me a chuckle because I remember growing up and going through school, high school, everything, hearing this name that no one seemed to be able to pronounce. And it's King Nebuchadnezzar, who we've heard about. He's very prominent in the book of Daniel. But in the prayer time this week, I can't even say that I was astonished when I asked, what do you want to teach about? He said, Nebuchadnezzar. I said, really? And this is a guy that I thought kind of was almost like a comic foil in Scripture. Always seemed to be getting outsmarted and having to run and fix things. Well, I'll tell you what, a detailed study of this guy reveals he's one of the most remarkable figures in the entire corpus of our Scripture. And we're going to look at him and circumstances that he was in, some that he put himself in, some the intrigue. He was not a foil or some kind of a goofball, as often is portrayed, nor was he a tyrant, as often is portrayed. What he was a Babylonian king, but his kingship was anointed by God. And we're going to look at this guy and the episodes. I mean, listen, God dedicates 4 entire chapters of the Bible to this guy and his interactions with some of God's chosen. All right, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and Daniel, all of whom had their names changed, of course, when they grew up in Babylon after the captivity. We're going to go through some of that backdrop in history that you don't hear very often. But I will tell you this, the crux of our discussion is going to focus on a different way of looking at miraculous events, or what appear to be miracles. And oftentimes they are, but they may not be singularly a miracle in the viewpoint from which we have been commonly taught to understand through stories and teaching and Bible class and, religions and whatever. Okay. Oftentimes, things, as you know from our studies together, are hiding in plain sight, or they're just totally misinterpreted or totally misread. People quote them, and there's no such quote in the Bible. And we're going to take a look at some of the mystery, or let's say calamities, that surrounded Nebuchadnezzar as a king of Babylon. Okay? One of the things that we want to talk about is the fact that he was from Babylon, who conquered Israel. But what he did with them is not commonly known. And even after the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians, King Cyrus, Persians, okay? Persians and Babylonians combined. Babylon's in Iraq. All right, but combined back then, all of that Persian Empire included Iraq and Iran, which only became separate countries, less than 100 years ago. I think back in the early 60s, but don't quote me. So what's important is that what we talked about last week or the past weeks with the atrocities that have happened over in Israel and the area there in the Middle East. Big to-do with Israel. 9,000 miles of territory sitting smack dab in the middle of 9 million miles of territory. You don't even tell me it's about land, because it's not. It goes all the way back to Esau and Jacob, just like we've talked all these months and years. But the interesting part is that today, the Iranian people or the Iraqi people are portrayed as enemies of Israel. And I say that's not so. I say that the religious beast that is formed, has been formed, was not, but now is again, that's a quote from Revelation, is the antagonist there. All right? Obviously. You murder children, cut little children's heads off. That's not war. That's pure, unadulterated, genocidal hatred. We know where it comes from. We also know the end result. But I want you to understand that these kings, these were kings, what they did for Israel, Judah, the people, stands out as a remarkable testimony in history that this was not a hatred. Not then. And I'm going to show you why, because it's right in Scripture. So anyway, before we do that, I want to give you just a little bit of a chronicle. You know, a chronicle is a historical record, just like the books of chronicles, of certain things. And in this case, what we're going to be talking about briefly is just about these kings. I want to talk about Nebuchadnezzar a little bit, okay? And briefly about Cyrus. But just to give you a little historical backdrop, okay? We're going to talk about it right now. It says in Jehoiakim's reign, which was dealt with in 2 Kings chapter 23, verses 35 to chapter 24, verse 7. 23, 35 through 24, 7. Briefly describes the transfer of allegiance from Necho, who had paid a heavy tribute to the Babylonian Nebuchadnezzar. All right. Background was that, no doubt, the Battle of Carchemish in modern Jerablus on the Euphrates in 605 BC, when the crown prince Nebuchadnezzar decisively defeated the Egyptians, an event that was alluded to in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 46:2. And then after succeeding his father as king in the same year, Nebuchadnezzar began to bring Syria and Palestine under his control. He was 37 when he ascended to the throne. And we're going to read about some really interesting stuff that happened as we get into those 4 chapters in the book of Daniel. All right. In 604, he captured Ashkelon, probably the occasion on which the Jehoiakim changed his allegiance. And about the same time, Jeremiah caused a scroll that he had dictated to be read at a public assembly in Jeremiah chapter 36, verses 9 through 10. In this, Jeremiah forecast that Nebuchadnezzar would destroy the land of Judah, and Jehoiakim had it burnt, this scroll, piece by piece, when it was read to him. So in 602 BC, Nebuchadnezzar engaged the Egyptian army somewhere near the border of Egypt, and the outcome was indecisive and could have been seen as a setback for the Babylonians. Possibly, this caused Jehoiakim to rebel against Nebuchadnezzar in 2 Kings 24:1. But it now became only a matter of time before Judah experienced the full force of Babylonian power. In 597 BC, Nebuchadnezzar came up against Jerusalem. He captured it on 16 March of that year. And according to 2 Kings 24:6, Jehoiakim died before the city's capture, leaving his son Jehoiakim to make the surrender. Okay? And according to 2 Kings 24:14, Nebuchadnezzar further exiled the administrators, soldiers, craftsmen, and he left only the poorest people of the land there. The number taken into exile or captivity were either 10,000 or 17,000, depending on whether or not the figures of 10,000 and 7,000 in 2 Kings 24 verses 14 and 16 are taken as inclusive of each other, which they should be. All right. So here we have it. Now, Babylon captures Jerusalem. Okay. And we have some more interesting things that happen, because not too far into the future, in 587 BC, Cyrus defeats the Babylonians. And in 539 BC, followed by his edict permitting the repatriation of exiles and the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. It's usually called the exile. But however, organized life in Judah did not cease. It never did. It's simply that we didn't have a lot of information about it. But the bottom line that we have here is that we have two kings, okay? One in Babylon, what would today be Iraq, and one who is a Persian, okay? And he's being Cyrus. And the unique thing about them both is that neither one ever tried to destroy, but they kind of did what happened after the Second World War. All right? They took and repatriated people, or even before that. They took folks in, like the scientists from Germany and Russia who migrated to Western countries, et cetera, and they brought something to bear. So this is not new to the 20th or the 21st century. This happened in 600 BC in Babylon. And then when the Persians defeated the Babylonians, now we have this whole picture of what was called Asia Minor, including all that land and all the peoples. But they did not come to destroy and wipe out the Jews, not by any means by a long shot. In fact, they both made edicts to repair and rebuild the temple and to go forth, even as Nehemiah went forth. Remember, these are contemporaries now, and to rebuild the walls and everything that went along with that. So to sit here and say today that there is a hatred amongst the peoples is a gross misrepresentation of the truth. It's never the people. It's those at the top that are pulling the shots, okay? Just like in this country. It's the same thing. They say the golden rule. Well, that really means whoever has the gold rules, all right? That's why it's not in the best interest of certain factions to the left in our own country. It's not in their best interest to see people earning money and making money and saving money. It's not. Because money, if you have money, you have the ability to withstand, and fight these people. And that's about what its value comes to in a situation like this today. It was the same thing was here back in scriptural times. As we're going to see, Nebuchadnezzar was a really smart guy. And what we're going to hope to get across tonight, and maybe it'll take longer, we're going to attack these four scriptures, but it's going to open up a whole series of inquiry where we see what appears to be miracles and in fact could be and are in fact miraculous. But the way we've looked at miracles is that we've sat and wait for God to do them or asked him to do them. Remember what we said last week? God said, I will do what you believe I will do. And in prayer, when you get the confirmation, like I did when I get asked for the messages, I believe, even if I can't see it right away, even if I don't grasp it right away, you persist in it, you stay in it, and you believe it. And it comes. And that's what happened here. Multiple times. What we're going to see is this remarkable guy, King Nebuchadnezzar, in all his glory and all his shame. But what we're going to see, and there's a very, very serious and big reason why he's so important. God asked me to teach about this man's transformation. Now, he's not just a biblical figure, he's a king. All right? He had the power of life and death over Israel, over Judah. Let's see what he did. Let's look at this transformation. Let's look at the steps and phases that he went through that are common pretty much to all men in what we go through, all people, in the phases of our walk and our desire to be one with God. But it was much more difficult during that time of the exile, Daniel, everything that went on. And it's simple when I'll tell you later what that one factor was, and realizing that that factor was not available, right, as it is today, makes Nebuchadnezzar all the more remarkable. Like I said, God gave 4 chapters to this one guy, and the cohorts there. So he must have thought it was pretty important. He must have thought it was really important. Okay. Now, Babylon was also called Chaldea in the past. And we know, I read to you what had happened there. And even after Cyrus was Artaxerxes the king, all of these Persian/Iranian folks from that area were not, they weren't, let's say, radical religionists or Islamists or whatever is going on over there in the Middle East. They weren't. They were just nations, powerful nations, whose time had come and empire building was what happened back then. And in fact, you're going to see the transformation of this man, Nebuchadnezzar, and the things that God revealed to him through Daniel, which are most remarkable considering the fact that they concern themselves with the end times. And they're very clear in their descriptions. Nebuchadnezzar was a man, king, chosen and anointed by God, even to do what he did in bringing down Jerusalem and the people. Because I'll tell you something. I got a lot of friends that are in the Marines, and I know people that certainly were in the Marines, and the old Marine drill sergeant methodology of tearing you down. You could be the toughest, baddest guy in the city block or wherever you're from, never lost a fight, all that stuff, big deal. It might save you on the streets, but it'll get you and your buddies killed in a war, because war is different. So the Marine sergeant's job, just like if you ever watch the movie Officer and the Gentleman, is to strip them down to nothing, all right? Not to weaken them, but to rebuild them in strength, because they have to be rebuilt in such a way that they understand that the guys next to them, the band of brothers, lives depend upon it, as well as the person. So God does that with us in many ways. We get stripped down. I always call it, we have to come to the end of ourself. When we come to the end of ourself, we're at that place where there's nowhere left to go. Down is as down as you're going to go. All right? And we ask, we say, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up higher and higher. Watch what this magnificent word does with our boy Nebuchadnezzar, or Nebuchadnezzar, however you think you want to say it. Okay? So, we're going to come close here. I can hardly see that screen. We're going to start out, and we're going to start to attack, so to speak, in the book of Daniel. Daniel means God is my judge, or God is the judge. And we talked about the time of the captivity being 605 BC. So this basically covers his lifetime. So we're going to start right off the gate with the deportation of Daniel of Babylon. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He came to Jerusalem to besiege it. Okay? And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. In other words, you're losing, Jehoiakim. Judah, you're done. With part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, and to his own God, to Nebuchadnezzar's own God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God, little g. Okay? He wasn't a believer yet. And the king spoke unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of the seed of Israel, the king's seed, and of the prince. He wanted the best of the best. All right? Children in whom there was no blemish. They were well favored. They were skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding science, and such that had the ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. These young fellows, maybe 20s, who knows, were chosen. They were handpicked to be in the court of the king, to teach the king the ways and vice versa of each culture, of each everything. What an opportunity to be able to bring this word. The king appointed them. He gave them a daily provision of meat and wine that he drank to nourish them for 3 years. All right. And among these were obviously the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. For he gave the name Daniel, Belteshazzar, as you remember. And he called Hananiah Shadrach, Mishael to Meshach, and Azariah was Abednego. Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. Those 3 guys went in the furnace, remember? We're going to get to that too, because it's all incorporated in these first 4 chapters. So once this happens, we see Daniel and his faithfulness in Babylon. All right? He purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat and drink. He said, no, I'm not doing that. And he was kind of favored by the prince of the eunuchs. So he called the guy and he says, come here. We got to talk. All right. God had brought Daniel into favor and a tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. They were very close, good friends. And the prince of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I'm afraid my lord the king is, he's the one that gave you this stuff, and, you got to eat it. And if you don't eat it, I'm going to be in trouble. He says, my head is in danger to the king, in verse 10. So Daniel says to Melzar, the prince of the eunuchs, and he says, prove thy servants, all right? For 10 days, just let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. And then let our countenance be looked upon. See, the king wanted to see them robust and healthy. So he was going to point to them, here's what you're getting to eat every day. This is your meat, this is your wine, whatever it is. And Daniel says, nah, we're not doing that. Give us pulse and water. Come back in 10 days, all right? So the guy thought about it. He says, you know what? All right, I'll take the shot. He consented. He gave him 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, it says in verse 15, their countenances appeared even fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which ate the portion of the king's meat. All right, so Melzar took away the portion of their meat and wine and gave them pulse. And that's that. Even that, under the order of the king, the prince of the eunuch knows, if they come in here looking shabby, and I didn't do something about it, I'm in trouble. These guys are all very, very cagey, very smart. There's a lot of intrigue that surrounded the court of these kings, which we've seen in many of our podcast messages and our teachings and our studies together. And this sure as heck is not even an ounce less. In fact, more so. I keep looking over the glasses because I'm getting a little glare there. Okay. I have to look and see how the clock is. So, now the reputation of Daniel in Babylon is taking prominence. The 4 children that God gave them knowledge and skill and all the learning and the wisdom, all right, and Daniel had understanding, listen to this, in all visions and dreams. In chapter 1, verse 17, Daniel himself had all skill in visions and dreams. All right. At the end of the days that the king said he should bring them with the prince of the eunuch before the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, none like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. Therefore, they stood before the king, which means they were allowed into the court of the king to participate. He was going to bring them in and to the close-knit king's court, which is pretty amazing. And it says in verse 20, all the matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers, all right, that were all in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. So it tells you right there that even after Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians, that Daniel's reputation was so strong, that he continued on into the reign of Cyrus, who was the conquering king of the Persians. So we come now to chapter 2, and we see that in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and this is very, very important now, all right, in the second year of his reign, he had dreams whereby his spirit was troubled and his sleep was broken. So the king commanded to call all the magicians and astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans to show the king his dream. In other words, to tell him what his dream was. He's not going to tell them what his dream was. He says, you're so smart, you tell me, okay? So they came, stood before the king, and in verse 3, it says, the king said to them, I dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled, and I need to know the dream. So then the Chaldeans speak to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. Yeah, that's not what he said. That's not what he asked for. He said, you tell me the dream, you're so smart. So the king answered, the thing is gone from me. I don't remember. You're going to have to make it known to me, the dream and the interpretation. And if you don't, I'm going to cut you in pieces, and your house are going to be made into a dunghill. Right? But if you show the dream and the interpretation thereof, you'll receive me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. They answered again, and they said, oh, yes, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we'll show you the interpretation. He's going, no. All right? No. We're coming up on break. But I will tell you this, the king answered, all right? And he said, I know certainly that you would gain the time because you see this thing is gone from me. He's telling him, I already know what you did, okay? So, you're not fooling me. This is the intrigue, and I'll start by explaining that when we come back. See you in a minute.